Welcome, friends, to Hold the Line with Buck Sexton. I'd like to start by saying that I hope you had a great weekend, but let's be honest. I know a lot of you probably didn't. You're most likely aware by now that on Saturday, every major network and cable news channel called the presidential race for former Vice President Joe Biden. You probably saw even the street celebrations in liberal strongholds like Washington and New York City. The smell of weed was pungent. I practically got a contact high in my own apartment. Lots of noise, lots of car horns and people shouting and dancing in the street. Oh, whatever happened to social distancing, I might want to ask. They were reacting to the news as if some third world dictator had finally been overthrown. A man so tyrannical that when the single greatest opportunity in a generation presented itself to consolidate power in the hands of the federal government, and I'm talking about COVID-19, he chose to just defer to the states and try to get us back to our normal lives and maximum freedom as soon as possible, just like Stalin would have. Yeah. So what now? Well, here's what CNN host and Democratic mouthpiece Fake Tapper is telling us to do.
As we say in Philadelphia, trust the process. Under slightly different circumstances, of course, but trust the process.
Trust the process, huh? Interesting demand, considering that casting doubt on the process is exactly what Democrats have been doing for the past 4 years. Those efforts started during the 2016 election with claims of Russian meddling in the election, really Russians determining the outcome, if you recall. Journalists breathlessly reported that Vladimir Putin and Russian intelligence services, quote, hacked our democracy. Of course, that turned out to be little more than a handful of Russian troll farmers and a pittance spent on Facebook ads. When all was said and done, the case against the companies financing these troll farms was so weak, the DOJ was forced to drop the charges in their entirety when it came time to prosecute them in 2018. Oh gosh. But it was Russian collusion. The idea the Trump campaign actively worked with a foreign government to bring down his opponent, Hillary Clinton, who maybe had she only found Wisconsin on a map, would have had a better shot in 2016. But you'll recall we were subjected to wall-to-wall coverage of these alleged crimes for 3 years, even after there was no evidence and an investigation and still no evidence. The Mueller report, of course, ultimately showed that. Libs didn't care. But evidence and truth were never the point. No, it was all an effort to undermine America's confidence in the duly elected commander-in-chief in the process that got him there. We don't have to go back into ancient history to find Democrats trying to undermine the validity of the process. Democrats were preparing to call this election fraudulent from the get-go. Remember that hysteria last summer over mailboxes? Democrats were pushing a wild-eyed conspiracy theory that Postal Service mailboxes and mail sorting machines were being removed en masse. Pictures like this were floating around Twitter, supposedly showing the USPS removing massive amounts of mailboxes in an effort to disenfranchise mail-in voters. And the conspiracy theory wasn't limited to wackos on Twitter. Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez explicitly accused the Trump administration of trying to sabotage democracy.
The Postal Service is not only how we send a ballot, it is how we get our medicine, it is how we send rent checks, it's where people are getting their tax refunds. It is a core service of any civilized society. And an attack on our Postal Service and an attempt to dismantle our Postal Service out of a selfish desire to sabotage our democracy and maintain a grip on power is an attack on all of us.
It's a nice speech, but no one sabotaged the post office. And no one was trying to sabotage the post office. In September, the Democrat-controlled House Oversight Committee launched an investigation of Postmaster General Louis DeJoy. It was supposedly an investigation of campaign finance issues, but it was really just a witch hunt to placate conspiracy theorists in the Democrat base. Ultimately, the disappearing mailboxes were either being removed for refurbishment or because they just weren't being used, decisions that were made prior to DeJoy even taking on the role of Postmaster General. So it would have had to be quite a conspiracy, right? After the mailbox fiasco came claims of voter suppression. Every long line of voters was now evidence of something nefarious. Here's what AOC said just a few weeks ago about the long lines that she was witnessing herself.
Listen, there is no place in the United States of America where 2, 3, 4 hour waits to vote is acceptable. And just because it's happening in a blue state doesn't mean that it's not voter suppression.
Yeah, she didn't really explain that thought process, but anyway, explaining AOC's thoughts, that would be a show unto itself. She wasn't the only Democrat to say that stuff, though. Congressman Emanuel Cleaver tweeted out a video of voters standing in the rain, writing, "This is what voter suppression looks like. It's a shameful attempt to deter Americans from exercising their fundamental right to have a say in our democracy." Of course, it couldn't be that there was just a record turnout and that it's difficult to accommodate millions of voters rushing to the first days of early voting. No, it had to be some nefarious plot by Trump and his allies to turn voters away. Like everything else they claimed about this, it was utter nonsense. Despite a total lack of evidence, the media has been cheerleading these conspiracy theories for 4 years, all in order to delegitimize the process. Now they want you to shut up and accept the result that you've been given. So what changed? Well, it looks like Joe Biden might have won the election. So now the process is sacrosanct. Can't even be questioned. Can't even be validated. The difference between our questions and theirs is that theirs are actually concerns about the security, or there actually are concerns about the security of mass mail-in balloting, unlike the nonsense they were talking about over the summer. It is 100% true that mail-in balloting opens the door to fraud. That's why developed countries have banned it. As a matter of fact, 63% of countries in the European Union do not allow mail-in ballots except for citizens living overseas. France, for example, mais oui bien sûr, banned mail-in voting in 1975 because of massive fraud in Corsica, an island off of France best known for being the birthplace of Napoleon. Well, postal ballots there were stolen or bought, and voters often cast multiple votes. That's what we call fraud. So the French were like, enough of this. Mail-in ballots were also used to cast votes for dead people over there. So what other developed nations have already figured out, in the U.S., we apparently haven't figured out yet. We know that mail-in voting opens a door to fraud. A bipartisan organization founded by Jimmy Carter and James Baker, the Commission on Federal Election Reform, you'd think they'd know something about this, I would guess. They told us so. In 2005, the group released a report that concluded, quote, absentee ballots remain the largest source of potential voter fraud. You wouldn't know any of this by listening to much of the corporate media today. They say that President Trump's warnings about the potential for increased voter fraud were baseless and without evidence. But their claims defy logic. Without the need to show up in person or present any form of identification, it's all but impossible to confirm that a vote delivered through the mail actually belongs to the person who supposedly sent it in. Additionally, there's already evidence of voter irregularities in key states. In one Michigan county, a software glitch counted at least 6,000 votes cast for President Trump as votes for Joe Biden. Notice how the glitches all tend to go in one direction.
In Antrim County, ballots were counted for Democrats that were meant for Republicans, causing a 6,000 vote swing against our candidates. The county clerk came forward and said tabulating software glitched and caused a miscalculation of the votes. Since then, we have now discovered that 47 counties use this same software in the same capacity.
In another critical swing state, Nevada, a whistleblower with the Clark County Elections Department signed a sworn affidavit claiming that poll workers fabricated proof of residence for illegal voters. None of this is even disputed. These are matters of established fact already. As I said last week, it's not whether or not there was voter fraud. There most certainly was. The only question is the scale at which it occurred. Look, I'm not going to sugarcoat the situation we find ourselves in. At this point, odds are against us. Odds are against the courts overturning the current vote tallies and delivering an electoral victory from the jaws of defeat to President Trump. But I just want to ask yourself, I want you to ask yourself this question. If the circumstances were reversed, do you think Joe Biden would be rushing to the phone to concede the election to Donald Trump? Come on. We can't know for sure, but we can take a guess based on what one of his colleagues said about the matter.
Joe Biden should not concede under any circumstances because I think this is going to drag out, and eventually I do believe he will win if we don't give an inch and if we are as focused and relentless as the other side is.
How did that charming, warm, and deeply elegant woman not become president of the United States? You have to ask yourself, how could that have ever happened? Look, I can't tell you when or even if Donald Trump is going to formally concede the election, but if I were him, I wouldn't be in any rush, okay? Let the process play out, folks. That's what we all deserve, and that's where we currently find ourselves. All right, when we come back, we're going to talk to someone who's in the midst of his own battle to guarantee a fair election. My friend, Republican candidate for Congress in Pennsylvania and former Army Ranger Sean Parnell, joins us next. My friends, our constitutional republic has rarely faced the perils we do today. Mob rule, a push for socialism, violence on the streets, suppression of basic freedoms. Edmund Burke said it, all it takes for evil to prevail is for good people to do nothing. If you want to help preserve America right now, while we still can, join AMAC, the Association of Mature American Citizens. It's the fastest growing conservative group in America. Joining AMAC gives you access to money-saving benefits, cutting-edge news, and a great bi-monthly magazine. But more importantly, AMAC fights for you. A socialist storm is brewing. If you care about our future like I do, then join AMAC today. Over 2 million constitutional conservatives like you and me have already joined AMAC. Stand with us by joining right now. Just go to amac.us/buck. That's amac.us/buck. The benefits of AMAC membership are great, but the cause is even greater. Join today at amac.us/buck.
Obviously, he's not going to concede when at least 600,000 ballots are in question.
President Trump's attorney, Rudy Giuliani, in Philadelphia this weekend, claiming that in Pennsylvania alone, 600,000 ballots are in question because they were counted without any poll watchers observing to ensure their legitimacy as state law requires. This as the Trump campaign brings a new wave of lawsuits contesting Biden's win of the presidency, with the first federal suit being filed today in Pennsylvania. Let's bring in someone who's at the epicenter of the vote fraud alleged in this nation. In terms of Pennsylvania being the heart of it all, congressional candidate in Pennsylvania's 17th district, Sean Parnell, still in a contested election. Although PA is currently being recounted, the Associated Press called the race for Sean's opponent, Democrat Connor Lamb, with a 51 to 49% win. But like the president, Sean has not conceded, and he is now with us to join and set the record straight. Sean, my friend, good to see you again.
Hey, good to see you, Buck. Thanks for having me.
Tell us, let's start with what you saw in your race firsthand in western Pennsylvania, and then you can tell us about what you think happens statewide and in Philly.
Yeah, sure. I will just tell you exactly what happened from my perspective. I was up by 43,500 votes on election night. No one expected us, I think, to do as well as we did, although internally we certainly expected to do well. And then Allegheny County stopped counting the vote. No one expected that either. And so they were supposed to start recounting the vote here in PA 17. They were supposed to start recounting the vote here in PA 17 the following day at 10, but they did not do that. Instead, the ranking member on the Board of Elections and a Lamb surrogate went out and did a media blitz, Buck, and started saying the same thing over and over again. Oh, we're confident that when all the votes are counted, Connor Lamb is going to be up by 2 percentage points. And in fact, that's where he is right now. So they started recounting the vote at 2:30, and in that time they closed the gap, and we expected them to close the gap because Connor Lamb has more mail-in ballots than we do. But there were two anomalies, I think, at the tail end of the day at 8:30, one ballot dump of 4,000 votes and another ballot dump of 9,000. That put Connor Lamb over the top and gave him a 2,500 vote margin. Literally 25 minutes after that ballot dump, he went out there and declared victory. Now, on the night on election day, we had done all the projections and done all the math, and there was no honest mathematical path for Connor Lamb's victory. In fact, we anticipated having a victory here in PA 17 by just over 13,000 votes. Networks called the race. Leader McCarthy called me to congratulate me, but those two ballot dumps, Buck, the day after Election Day equaled, you guessed it, 13,000 votes. And so what we're trying to do is figure out where those 13,000 ballots came from, and we have not gotten any answers as of yet.
So before I ask you what you think may have happened that is a problem, is a violation of election law, or it needs to be corrected in some way, let me ask you this, Sean. What irregularities have we already seen in your race and in Pennsylvania more broadly?
Yeah, well, we've seen just in a quick search dead people voting in PA 17, and while we certainly thank we thank Civil War generals for their service, they probably shouldn't be voting in 2020. Another thing that came up today is people voting twice. People requesting a mail-in ballot and then showing up in person to also vote. We've also noticed there were 19,000 Democrat mail-in ballots in Beaver County. Now, Beaver County, I won. The entire county is in my district. I won it 75-25. Beaver County is known for old school Democrats who cross party lines. In fact, Beaver County has gotten more red with every successive election. We're learning now that all 19,000 mail-in ballots for the Democrats in Beaver County, straight party ticket. That's certainly an anomaly. There are a lot of nursing homes also in Beaver County where the residents requested and returned ballots all on the same day. So look, all I'm saying is when the dust settles from this election, right? And if I do come up short, fine. You know, I've played sports my whole life. I know how to lose graciously, but I think that 70 million people in this country will never trust an election again if we don't get it right. And over the last 3 days, Buck, I've gotten thousands of messages, over 200,000+ people voted for me here in PA 17. I've gotten thousands of messages from people here saying, look into this. This doesn't make sense. Something doesn't seem right. Let's audit the vote to make sure that legal voters are in fact voting. You know, because if you look at the statistics, Buck, over 56% of the people that voted for Connor Lamb, that's over 110,000 people, mailed in their ballot. And if you have someone that is dead voting, a non-resident voting, a felon, an illegal immigrant voting, well, those votes cancel out the votes of legal voters. So don't we owe it to the American people, the 200,000 people that voted for me and the 200,000 people who voted for him, to get this right? And the only way that we can really do that is to audit the vote.
Now, what are some of the challenges to auditing the vote properly that have come about because of changes made in the way voting was done this time around in Pennsylvania? Can you kind of help explain? We know the Supreme Court had to get involved. We know there were some last-minute switches. What happened, and how is that going to make things more difficult?
Yeah, that's a great question. So mail-in voting like we have in Florida's got it down to a science, right? And the mail-in system that we have here in Pennsylvania was a bipartisan developed system in the image of Florida. But the problem is that our governor removed all the safeguards that would make mail-in voting indeed safe. Like, he removed the signature matching requirement. He removed any deadlines. In fact, he said you could deliver a mail-in ballot up to 3 days after the election with no postmark. You don't even have to prove that you're a resident of the state of Pennsylvania to vote with a provisional ballot here. So is mail-in voting safe? Is there a right way to do it? Sure, but we're not doing that here. And because of that, because of the governor's policies, you know, from the governor to the attorney general to the PA secretary of state on down, their policies have sown chaos into the electoral system here in Pennsylvania. And I am telling you, people don't trust this result. And I think we owe it to the American people to do a deep dive and audit the vote to get a sense of who's in fact voting and is it legitimate.
How concerned are you that there was intentional fraud coming out of Philadelphia, specifically the political machine there?
It happened. And you know, look, this is just a feeling, right? And all the journalists watching this are going to say, oh, Parnell is making unfounded allegations of voter fraud. Look, if all I'm simply saying is that we should look into it, right? This is the first time we've implemented a universal mail-in system or early vote or no excuse absentee voting in Pennsylvania. And there are two ways to present a case. You can either present a case with a confession and a body, or you can build a case and present that case to the jury. We're doing the latter right now, trying to build that case and make the case here in court in Western Pennsylvania that perhaps we should take a deeper look at some of these votes to make sure that the integrity of our elections remain intact and fair and free.
What needs to be done just to get answers in your case, Sean? And if people want to help out, where should they go?
Well, we've got an election defense fund set up. You can go to seanforcongress.co. The reality is it costs money, right? We've got to hire lawyers, we've got to pay those lawyers, and we've got to have those lawyers take our case to court to make the case to a judge. And we're doing that, but we're doing everything we can to raise money. So if you want to help me protect the integrity of our elections, please go to seanforcongress.co and chip in a little bit to our election defense fund, and let's help the American people get answers on this stuff.
Sean Parnell, everybody, Army Ranger, still congressional contestant. Sean, appreciate it, man. We'll talk to you soon.
Thanks, Buck.
Coming up, Joe Biden's now calling for unity after the media called the election in his favor. Some of his colleagues in the Democrat Party don't seem to agree with that approach. We've got details in tonight's Buck Brief. Economic uncertainty has left us all wondering about the future. Stock market goes back and forth, blows around with the winds of political change. So what should we do to protect ourselves and our income for the future? For over a decade now, simple and conservative real estate investing has been the retirement answer for thousands of done-for-you real estate clients, and is now part of my answer to retirement. I'm not just a believer in what done-for-you real estate does in principle, I'm also a client. I recently closed on my first ever investment property with my friends at Done For You Real Estate. Their system flat out works. Done For You Real Estate found me an amazing property, got me the financing, got it all fixed up, and they're now renting it out and managing it for me. They're an award-winning, groundbreaking company with 13 years of experience that allows everyday, hardworking Americans to finally own investment real estate without all the risk and difficulty of doing it on your own. Visit doneforyoubuck.com to learn more and to find out if you qualify to take advantage of what may be a once-in-a-generation opportunity to finally own your own real estate investment. While Joe Biden, Kamala Harris, and others continue to parrot the boilerplate about national unity, love, and friendship, they actually mean just be quiet. Unify or else! But anyway, the rising stars in the Democrat Party are promoting something very different. Enemies lists for anyone who was even remotely associated with the Trump administration. I don't just mean inside, I mean anybody that even supported it too much. Maybe like me. De facto House Speaker, I like that we call her that now, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez has called for an archiving of any individuals connected with the Trump administration and campaign. She wants to make sure they never have another job again. This is cancel culture on steroids, actually, and it reeks a lot of McCarthyism. If you think this is just a one-off tweet from a crazy former bartender from New York, you'd be wrong. Former senior DNC staffers have already institutionalized this sentiment and formally launched the Trump Accountability Project, which seeks to do exactly what AOC asked for, maintain those political hit lists. So much for the moderate and unifying Democrat Party. The election results haven't even been certified yet, and major figures in their party have already launched neo-Marxist purges. It's time to open up the Buck Brief. So while we were supposed to be all dancing over the weekend, having fun, out in the sunshine here, at least in New York, it's a beautiful day, and people are shouting and cheering and spraying champagne all over the place, yay. Other people were taking it as an opportunity to make sure that they can get vengeance upon their political opponents, even in victory. That's right, it's not enough to win, at least they think they've won. They also want to now go around and bayonet the survivors. So AOC tweeted this, she tweeted out about having the list, and then there's this thing called the Trump Accountability Project, right? You better believe it. We just launched the Trump Accountability Project to make sure anyone who did a paycheck or took a paycheck to help Trump undermine America is held responsible for what they did. Look, it's funny. Liberals have embraced a kind of political psychopathy that if all the psychiatrists in America weren't pretty much all far left-wing libs, I'm sure we could come up with some really interesting diagnoses of it. I believe we're going to be switching from what you'd have to call Trump derangement syndrome to what I'm calling BWS, Biden worship syndrome. You're going to see that all across the media. But that's not even enough. They've won, or at least they've declared victory, and they want to make sure that anybody who was involved with the Trump administration is already being purged from public life. No board seats, no sinecures at think tanks, no contributorships on TV. Don't they understand? We already deal with all this crap. We already deal with all this nonsense from the libs. This is nothing new. We just want to live our lives in peace. Conservatives are like, all right, fine. Maybe we didn't win this one. We'll see. Not giving up yet. But we're not going to hound and harass people over what they did politically in the past. No, that kind of authoritarian impulse sits very squarely on the left side of our politics. Here's a quote from the Trump Accountability Project. "We must never forget those who further the Trump agenda. We should welcome in our fellow Americans with whom we differ politically, but those who took a paycheck from the Trump administration should not profit from their efforts to tear our democracy apart. The world should never forget those who, when faced with a decision, chose to put their money, their time, and their reputations behind separating children from their families, encouraging racism and anti-Semitism." Encouraging anti-Semitism? I mean, really? They're going to go with that? "And negligently causing the unnecessary loss of life and economic devastation from our country's failed response to the..." I mean, these people are absolutely absurd. Let's be very clear about this. But this is unfortunately not a particularly isolated sensibility among Democrats. They really want there to be consequences. And part of it, I think, is their recognition that let's just move into the future. Let's assume that Joe Biden ends up with 4 years, well, in 4 years technically, but we all know after a couple, he's probably going to say, "Kamala, take over. I'm tired and I need a nap and I need to feed the squirrels with a blanket over my knees." But nonetheless, we know that even if that happens, the Trump administration, the Trump people are going to be out there making their case. And there's already reporting that Trump is thinking about running again in 4 years. So what they're doing right now is at some level, of course, just insane and vicious and vindictive. But it's also important for all of us to understand that there's a method to the madness. Because they realize that Donald Trump right now, or somebody who picks up the Trump mantle, would be a formidable candidate in 4 years, that getting 70 million plus votes for a Republican in a pandemic year feels like in a normal year we'll be in pretty darn good shape to win the presidency. So that's why they want to make sure that they can deprive the administration of having the same kinds of people who came and worked for it the last time. Remember, this was actually an effort in the very beginning of Trump's 4 years. They were trying to prevent people from even going to work in expertise-based areas of the administration. So this is not a new strategy. Oh, I'm going to go work at the Department of Defense under Trump. No, you can't do that. You'll never work in this town again. About D.C., not Hollywood, but that's what they mean. This is why I think it's difficult to take any of these claims of a Democrat Party that wants unity very seriously. This was Joe Biden tweeting this out. "A nation united, a nation strengthened, a nation healed, the United States of America." Yeah, I mean, this is kind of what we would expect, I suppose, from Democrats, that they would play this nonsense game where they act like they want to be friends now. But they don't. I can assure you of that. And really, the unity charge is meant to silence people like me, and I'm sure a lot of you out there, who are still saying, hold on a second, this is not over, and also already making the case for how absurd it is that anybody really believes Joe Biden is going to be a good president, and this guy has leadership qualities that should be celebrated. This guy has an intellectual capacity that should be given even more power than it already has for decades and decades of him largely being a lobbyist for the credit card companies based in Delaware. So yeah, I think that we can put a little halt on the unity calls right now because they don't come from a place of actually uniting the country. We'll see what their actions are. I'm willing to change my mind in the future if they're going to be fair, but nobody really expects that. This is all meant to silence you or purge you, just a question of which Democrat and on which day. So we'll continue to look at this and just make sure that you don't fall for it. They're pretending right now, especially that they want to bring the country together, because that way, if you stand athwart them, you're a bad person. You're somebody that can't be trusted. You're somebody who doesn't want to bring the country together. The Trump campaign's preparing to go all out to make sure all the legal votes are counted in key states. We're going to speak to someone at the forefront of that battle up next.
Well, the networks thought Biden was going to win by 10%. Gee, what happened? Come on, don't be ridiculous. Networks don't get to decide elections. Courts do.
President Trump's attorney, Rudy Giuliani, Saturday scoffing at the notion the presidential contest went for Joe Biden, saying that networks don't get to decide elections. Fact check, true. President Trump also blasted the media for calling the election early, tweeting, "Since when does the lamestream media," I haven't seen that one in a while, "call who our next president will be? We've learned a lot in the last 2 weeks." This going on as the president's legal team is preparing for an all-out war with a slew of lawsuits alleging widespread voter fraud in at least 6 key swing states. Joining me now is someone who's fighting at the forefront of this election battle, Chairman of the American Conservative Union, Matt Schlapp. Matt, great to see you.
Great to be with you, Buck.
So you were sent out to Nevada at the behest of the president, the campaign. Tell us what you're finding out there so far.
Well, I didn't know what I would find. I'd always heard rumors about this Clark County Harry Reid political machine and its corruption, but we've really never been able to crack it. And when we hit the ground, I think that there was so much corruption and voting irregularity this time that we actually have whistleblowers that are coming forward and saying what they saw happen with the machine. We have one whistleblower who is saying, and by the way, this has been referred to DOJ, this is real. I've talked to these whistleblowers. I just can't believe what you hear. I'm going to just refer to them as guys using the male pronoun, but one talked about how he was told that even when he saw ballots and received ballots that were clearly illegal, not on the rolls, no signature match, other disqualifiers, he was told by his supervisor he had to put them in the count anyway. And by the way, once a ballot leaves your fingertips and goes into the count, it's gone. You don't get it back. There's not some kind of serial number on it that he could have jotted down. So all these polluted ballots are in the count. We have another whistleblower who said over his lunch hour, he observed a van pull up at a precinct with tons of unopened ballots, baskets of them. And they literally sat there in the van, on the side of the van, filling in the holes and then putting them in envelopes and then turning them into the precinct. When they noticed that this person was watching, they created a human shield around their little work area by the side of the van. This is just the stuff you read about in the third world. This should never happen anywhere. It should definitely not happen in America.
What would the campaign like to see happen in Nevada specifically? What has to go on here for us to, I mean, you said that once a ballot, for example, gets entered into the count, not really able to track that down. So what can be done so that we find out who really won the state of Nevada, and are you confident it will be done?
It's the right question. So like the dead people who voted in Nevada, we had a blind woman who went in to vote, and somebody corruptly they had sent one of these mail-in ballots out into the world, and someone voted for her, sent it in, and when she went in to vote, they said, "You can't vote because someone already voted for you." And then we took this to court, and the Obama-appointed judge said, "Well, just pull her ballot back out." And the registrar said, "Well, you really can't. These are anonymous ballots. Once they get separated from the envelopes, we'll never be able to pull them back out of the system." And so the judge said, "Oh, I guess we'll just have to deal with the fact that we have illegal votes in the count." And this poor woman never got a chance to vote. This is what's happening. Republicans, Trump supporters are being disenfranchised by the hundreds. And Buck, you asked the right question. You can't get these tarnished, illegal, improper ballots back out of the count. So all we can do is amplify the numbers. We're up to over 9,000 examples of corrupt ballots that should never have been cast. I have a feeling I know who they voted for.
I think I do too. It's fascinating, isn't it? The glitches also, or the irregularities, Matt, tend to go one way.
They go one way.
I can't think of a single voting irregularity thus far that's been identified where Trump was the beneficiary illicitly of thousands or even hundreds of votes, and yet here we are. What do you think is next here for the campaign? I mean, we talked to one of the campaign lawyers last week. They're bringing suit in various states. Are you confident that they're going to be able to get, right now it's about transparency and the process and getting answers. Are you confident we'll be able to get those answers about what really happened here?
I think we're never going to know the full story. This was a breathtaking amount of illegal, felonious behavior. And until we get into these rooms, this is part of this. Part of our next step in the lawsuit is they're continuing with this illegal activity because we're not able to get into these rooms and count them. and watch them and observe them. And this is what's happening in Philadelphia, and this is what's happening in Vegas. So people should know that when members of the media say there's no evidence, they're lying. We have 9,000 pieces of evidence. When they say that this election is going on like all previous ones, they're wrong. These cities these mayors of these cities that let these cities burn down literally months ago and want to defund cops, and they're okay when cops get executed in their squad cars, they're also just fine with the idea of stealing votes and preventing Republicans from observing. We don't have a problem with systemic racism in this country, although we do have a problem, obviously, with race. We do have a problem with systemic socialism in these big cities where there's so much corruption, including in voting. We'll never elect another Republican president again unless we stand up at this moment. Leave it to Donald Trump to understand that and to be willing to fight.
Based on what you've seen so far, Matt, what can you tell me about, or I want you to react to Sidney Powell, one of the lawyers involved with the administration here, what she said about votes that went for Biden and only Biden. Play it.
There has been a massive and coordinated effort to steal this election from we, the people of the United States of America, to delegitimize and destroy votes for Donald Trump, to manufacture votes for Joe Biden. We've identified at least 450,000 ballots in the key states that miraculously only have a mark for Joe Biden on them and no other candidate.
That strikes me as a little bit strange, Matt. How does that strike you? What do you think of that? The 450,000 Biden-only votes.
I think all ballot harvesting should be illegal. In most states, it is illegal. But even when the law has made some aspects of it somewhat legal, the idea that you're doing something wrong, you're basically taking someone's ballot that they didn't intend to vote on, and you are going to vote on it. You're not going to spend a lot of time on that ballot, Buck, looking at all the the language and the propositions. You're going to quickly fill in the candidate you care about, and then you're going to move on. And that's why when they talk about a blue wave or red wave, it's very strange that there seemed to be a little bit of a blue wave for Joe Biden in some of these big cities, but that it didn't affect these congressional races or these Senate races where the Republican Party did quite well. The other thing in Nevada, the computer they used to scan their envelopes, it essentially was dumbed down to the point where we have talked to the experts that said once they started tinkering with the machines, as they did in Clark County, it's essentially useless. So these 600,000 ballots that have been scanned to do a signature check, I think it's X marks the spot kind of stuff. So they put the ballots out into the community corruptly without checking them and deduping them for dead people and people who had moved away and people who were too young. Then when the ballots were returned, they didn't allow Republicans to observe to make sure that these were legal ballots. Now those ballots are in the count, and they thought that they would get away with it, and we would do what Republicans always do, which is we know it's getting stolen, but we don't stand up and fight it. And we're going to fight it, and we're going to break it down. So for the people of Clark County and the people in Philadelphia and the people in these big cities who think that they can prevent Donald Trump from getting the votes that he deserved to get, game on.
Matt Schlapp, everybody, chairman of the American Conservative Union. Matt, good to see you, man. Stay in the fight. Thank you.
No doubts, Buck.
Coming up, I'll take aim at some left-wing lunacy and some of the most ridiculous takes on the internet today in the Buckshot. There's one constant in my day-to-day, Black Rifle coffee. I'm drinking it 3-4 times a day. It's absolutely delicious. This is small batch, roast-to-order coffee brought to you by veterans of the special operations community. In fact, Black Rifle Coffee Company CEO and founder Evan Hafer started the company after 20 years in the U.S. Army as an infantryman and special forces soldier. He founded Black Rifle in 2014 along with Army Ranger Matt Best. They combined two passions, developing premium, fresh roasted coffee and honoring and supporting those who serve on the front lines. Black Rifle Coffee has donated over 45,000 pounds of coffee or over 1 million cups of coffee to soldiers deployed overseas, law enforcement officers, wildland firefighters on the West Coast, and medical workers during the COVID-19 response. That's just in 2020 alone. For every coffee purchase you make throughout November, Black Rifle Coffee will send a bag of their limited edition holiday roast to a service member currently deployed overseas to be delivered by Christmas morning. Being founded and operated by veterans, the team at Black Rifle Coffee knows what a quality cup of coffee means to active duty troops spending the holidays away from home. Want to support the cause? Go to blackriflecoffee.com/buck today and check out the freshest coffee in America. Again, that's blackriflecoffee.com/buck. Team has spent thousands of hours tasting, sourcing, and perfecting coffee from all over the world. blackriflecoffee.com/buck gets you 20% off coffee, also apparel and gear, as well as 20% off your first month of the Coffee Club. Join today. New York Governor Cuomo's not too happy with news about the COVID vaccine. It's kind of weird. We'll explain. BLM isn't happy about, well, anything these days. And time for our roundup of left-wing lunacy in the buckshot. Stock market booming today. Big news about vaccines. You've got Pfizer saying they've got about a 90% effective vaccine that's going to be coming out any day now for approval. And once it's approved, they've already made the stockpiles thanks to the Trump administration and Operation Warp Speed. Earlier today, there was some concern among Pfizer executives that they were trying to say they did not partner with the administration. It's not really true. They did. The administration guaranteed them a couple $2 billion of buying their vaccine so then they could risk the capital and the research and development dollars to get this thing going. So it was, in fact, Operation Warp Speed, the Trump administration, that got us to this point, along with, of course, all the excellent scientific research and everything else done by Pfizer. But now we have people who are looking at the future and understanding that COVID is probably going to be eradicated in 2021, largely, if not entirely. Everybody should be happy about this. Stock market, as I said, big bounce, but Governor Cuomo of New York has some somewhat different thoughts about it. Play it.
Of vaccine distribution in the next 2 months. What do you make of this news?
Well, it's good news, bad news, George. The good news is the Pfizer tests look good and we'll have a vaccine shortly. The bad news is that it's about 2 months before.
It's about 2 months before Biden takes over. That's what he goes on to say, basically. So the bad news is that the Trump administration is going to be able to start this thing, which makes it harder for Kamala Harris and Joe Biden to take credit for a vaccine that they will have inherited entirely at that point in time. But don't worry, they're going to listen to the science. Yeah, that's right. They're going to listen to this. What does that even mean? It's a dumb phrase. I don't want anyone even says this out loud. Listen to the science? Sure. BLM. You remember that movement that got going again this summer? It started back under the Obama administration, you'll recall, from the incident in Ferguson, Missouri, but they were back at it over the summer. Lots of mostly peaceful protests and some really not peaceful at all protests where there were whole neighborhoods that were attacked, burned down, buildings ransacked, looted, some very bad stuff going on. But Biden won. And he won in no small part because of the African-American voters in some major cities in key swing states that came out in huge numbers for him. So you'd think, I mean, BLM, aren't they going to be a part of the dance parties and be all happy about what just happened, right? The Biden's declaration of victory? Not so much. Play it. Yeah, so they're still out marching, still upset. I understand they say they're marching for Black Lives, but if you recall, Black Lives Matter was actually exposed over the summer as a Marxist group that has a whole bunch of agenda items that have absolutely nothing to do with police violence or brutality and is really an organizing principle, broad organizing principle for left-wing activists of all kinds all across America, including Antifa, who have taken up the BLM mantle themselves in order to justify throwing bags of feces and bottles of urine at police officers, because that's obviously something that's particularly helpful to our society if you're a total moron. Leftists, though, what do they really think? Speaking of where BLM is, what do they really think of the white liberal Biden voters out there at this point in time? Going back with the, is BLM happy about this? Play it.
For all of you journalists! For all of you fucking journalists! For all of you white liberals! For all of you white liberals! Who have been celebrating! Getting drunk off your asses! And drunk off your asses! together. Get it together.
Wait, I thought all we had to do was vote for Biden and the psychopaths in the Democrat Party would calm down a little bit. Wait, what do you mean? You mean the hostage taking of America? We had to vote for Biden or else? Biden won, right? That's what they think, at least. Don't tell them. Biden won, so shouldn't everything be cool and calm now? Not by much, huh? Not a whole lot of change. Oh, and where are we right now, speaking of change, with the COVID pandemic, given that we have this 90% plus successful vaccine that's about to come out, among many other vaccines too, just so you know. There are other vaccines that'll be out there. They've already got huge stockpiles ready to go. They're going to be distributing this within a matter of weeks, most likely, not months. What happened to COVID? Play it. Social distancing doesn't matter when you got some social justice to celebrate, apparently, huh? I feel bad for them. They're going to realize Joe Biden is just a mediocrity, and they've elevated this guy way beyond his station or his ability. And that's what's going to happen here, folks. They're going to figure it out, but it's going to take a while if he becomes the president, which is still an if. Still an if. We have not given up the fight here. That's it for Hold the Line with Buck Sexton for today. Up next, the No Spin News with Bill O'Reilly. As always, shields high.